Hey, crummy people. Sorry for the late start for the tech diffs. First time we've ever not had a guest. First time we have technical difficulty.
It's been a day, man.
Tell me about your day, Ryan.
Well, the alternator on my van is something's up with, so I'm like kind of trapped in Michigan right now.
Sweet.
Which, there could be worse things, I guess.
Yeah.
Just hanging out here.
Yeah, watching, that's good.
Whatever.
As if there was something else to do.
True. What's going on with you, man?
Nothing. A lot of walking around in the woods. A lot of just like idly playing guitar and not actually writing anything.
Oh yeah, that's the best.
Yeah. Been watching been rewatching the Jurassic Parks, which is my favorite movie franchise. Just while I'm idly strumming guitar or working out or something. And so
the whole franchise, I mean, we've talked about that. We've watched Jurassic Park before, but you celebrate the entire franchise?
I celebrate 1 and 2 mostly. And then like
2 is Vince Vaughn, right?
Yeah. But it's still good. I mean, 2 is Spielberg still. I think. Yeah, it's Spielberg. It's just Michael Crichton didn't like co-write the script for 2.
You need that Crichton magic.
I know. But I'll watch any of them because dinosaurs. You know what's crazy to me is that they're like Jurassic Park is really the only franchise that has like really taken a run at dinosaurs in like the sense of like without other things going on. Like it's just dinosaurs. We created dinosaurs. Now we got to deal with dinosaurs, right? Like there's not really anything that's been good of like back in time to dinosaur times or maybe briefly in certain movies. But I just think it's weird that like maybe it's just like they've done so well that anything that somebody does will automatically be compared to it. And people are like, it's not worth it.
The new ones are kind of garbage.
Kind of. I mean, they're not great.
That first one, though, I remember seeing that in the movie theater and it blowing my mind. I watched it the other night, too. And, like, that first time you see a dinosaur, I was telling Jen, I was like, I remember being in the movie theater, being like a kid and just totally freaking out.
Right. I mean, I think that it's still – I think the CGI is pretty good still. Like – I think some of the newer CGI looks more fake than that CGI does.
Totally.
It's wild how, and if you're a nerd like me, maybe you've seen the DVD like comes with a bonus feature that's like the making of Jurassic Park. And they talk a lot about the balance they did between animatronic and CGI and like the battle that happened. Cause it was right when CGI was like becoming a thing. And they talk about the ways like they tried to make like the Gallimimus running across the field. They like literally put all of their like people in the parking lot and had them run like doing an impression of a Gallimimus and like jump over something just to like kind of like get the idea of how like moving beings would do it. And the famous the ripples in the cup. When they're in the car and the T-Rex is coming and you see the ripples in the cup, they couldn't figure out how to do it. And Spielberg was crazy and was like, we need it to be perfect circles and like all this. And they ended up stringing a guitar string from right under the cup, under the car down to the ground. And there's literally a guy sitting there pulling the guitar string to make the circles. So that's movie magic, everybody.
I think that
welcome to Crumbs.
I'm trying to think. That might be my favorite John. I'm trying to think like what's the best John Williams theme song?
I think it's Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones is a good call too.
I get fired up for Indiana Jones, but Jurassic Park is like no doubt. Like maybe Jurassic Park and Star Wars are probably the only ones where multiple movements.
That's true.
Of the John Williams score.
But like the theme of Star Wars is not my favorite theme.
No, it's great for the movie, but it's not.
It's
I'm
great
not
for the
going to like
movie,
throw
but,
it
like,
on.
I'm not throwing it. Yeah, I'm not throwing on Star Wars. I'm not just throwing it on.
No,
What else did John Williams do? Did he do Harry Potter?
I don't think. Did he? I don't know. I can look it up. He did E.T. He did Jaws. Jaws is obviously an amazing. I think he's done pretty much every Spielberg movie, right?
Man, you might be right. That Indiana Jones theme is pretty.
It's pretty awesome.
Pretty
Close
awesome.
Encounters of the Third Kind. He did. Why is this Wikipedia page so hard to navigate? I don't know. He's done amazing ones. Adventures of Tintin.
I don't even know what that is.
I don't know. Oh, he did the first. Oh no, I don't know what's going on. I'm not going to say this. Oh, he did. He did Harry Potter.
That's a good one too.
That's a good one. That's a very good one. So that's cool. I still think Indiana Jones. To get fired up about something is the best one.
Those have been the best things to. I mean, I've been burning through a lot of documentaries, mostly documentaries, because I get bored with everything else.
Yeah.
But I can throw on like old Indiana Jones or Jurassic Park and stuff and just be like, oh yeah.
There was
like a warm sweater.
Right. There was a period of time in late March where I thought I had COVID, and I might have had it, like just not very bad. And I was just in bed for 2 days straight, and I watched all of the Indiana Jones movies, and it was amazing. And it made me feel better. It's chicken soup for the soul.
It's kind of weird watching them again. And things that I never, like as a kid, was just like, yeah, of course. Now are so odd to me. Like the third one the end of the third one is completely wild. Well, I guess it kind of deals with all of them. So in those movies, you kind of have to believe that you are existing in like a Judeo-Christian world, right?
They're very Christian, yeah.
But there are also aliens.
Right.
Because the fourth one, and I'm not sure how the second plays into it, but like there's definitely like this totally like Judeo-Christian overtone.
Sure.
And then in the third one, when we watched it, did you watch that? Which one is that? The Last Crusade?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That whole end is insane.
You mean the knight in the Holy Grail?
Yeah. So that knight has basically just been living in there by himself, growing old, like and so everybody like is excited about the Holy Grail because it makes you immortal.
Right.
But it doesn't deal with aging at all.
I know, he's like, why did he keep aging?
So like that guy kept or so he got in there, I'm assuming when he was a relatively young man, right?
Right.
So he's probably in there, let's say at the time, medieval times, like probably in his 20s, early 30s, you're probably an old man. So he's in there like, I'm just going to guard this and keep drinking from this grail. And so then he has to age like 60 years until he's like 100. His back hurts. He can't lift up his sword. And then he's just stuck there.
Yeah, that guy. How would you like to be the dude who is cast to be somebody who's supposedly hundreds of years old? And they're just like, yeah, you look like you could be a couple hundred years old. Why don't you come in here?
I would kind of love it.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to do one of those like when he picks up the sword and he's like, oh, it's so heavy. And then I'm wondering like, well, this is such a crappy job because you're drinking this thing to be immortal, to protect the grail, but you can't lift your sword up. Like this thing gives you no other powers than just like
it was
being
ill thought
alone
out.
and old.
Right.
So do you think there were days when he did try to pick, like he got spooked, he picked his sword up, he fell, threw his back out, and then is just laying there for like years, just like, oh,
can't reach his grail.
Yeah.
There was that, and the part like where so Sean Connery. I'm gonna spoiler alerts all over the place. If you've had a long time to see The Last Crusade, so I don't feel bad about it. But the part like Sean Connery gets shot, right? and then they just pour Grail water on his wound, and he drinks it. And then there's just like, there's no acknowledgement of now Sean Connery is immortal.
Also, so they tell Indiana Jones the rules to that when he's like back there. So you're only immortal when you're in the cave.
Oh, really? I didn't even
tell
catch
his dad that.
So his dad's walking around, going hang gliding.
And honestly, if you're like his dad's age in that movie and you get shot, and they're like, your options are like, do you want to be immortal or die? And I caught a glance at that night guy, I would be like, I'll just let it go. Just let me go, man.
I don't need to do it. And every Indiana Jones movie has to end with someone, because of their greed, having their head get melted in like God's fury.
But isn't Indiana Jones kind of greedy? Like at the beginning of that movie, so we're really going to focus on Last Crusade here.
Let's do it, yeah.
So he chases that one guy down that took the cross when he's like young Indiana Jones, River Phoenix, right?
Yeah.
He spends a whole part of his life apparently like really mad that cross is not in a museum, and then kills a ton of people to get it. Like people die.
That's true.
Throwing people overboard. He's lighting stuff on fire.
It's a classic, like, henchmen's lives don't matter at all. Like, if you are associated with this person, you're going to die, right? There's the lack of value on life in movies is despicable, Ryan.
I'm just saying, Indiana Jones, he's got his flaws.
He's got it. Okay, well, welcome to Crumbs, everybody.
The kind of stuff we're talking about today.
12 minutes in, we've only talked about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Little housekeeping, if you're following along at home and you can't catch all these live, we are available on Spotify now. So all previous 9 episodes are on Spotify, as well as a couple other streaming services for podcasts. Thanks to Anchor.fm, which is awesome. And I'm sure you'll start hearing us reading ads for Anchor before those podcasts.
I like that last week we totally shit all over Spotify. And then this week we're like, find us on Spotify, guys.
And I don't even think we get a streaming royalty.
No, of course not.
I think it's just like, cool. But it's available there now. So that's cool. I didn't see a whole lot of music news this week.
I've got some music news for you.
Oh,
well, no, go ahead. You had something.
No, the only thing I had was that Buzz from the Melvins is alt-right loser.
Oh, yeah.
So cancel the Melvins, I guess.
Which is depressing, but also was oddly not surprising.
No. Yeah, I don't know. I guess like I have the assumption that everybody's cool until they aren't until 2020. And now I assume everybody's awful until you can somehow prove that you're not awful.
Yeah, that's good.
So, and so the innocent until proven guilty thing got flipped. So I wasn't that surprised, I guess. I was just kind of like, oh, how about that? Speaking of awful people in the music business, the Beach Boys are playing a show in Cedar Rapids in a couple weeks. They're playing 3 shows in Iowa in a couple weeks, outdoor amphitheater shows. But is there anybody more perfect as the face of like the masked defiant morons than Mike Love?
I think Mike Love is probably the perfect person to represent like
being an idiot,
being a total idiot. Is he like the only original Beach Boy in that?
No, I don't know for sure. I can't imagine though. He's not even an original Beach Boy, is he? Or he was? I don't know. I forget the.
I don't know.
That's
there. One of those things that it's like, what did Mike Love do in the Beach Boys? Does he just kind of sing along?
Well, he's a cousin, right? And so
yeah, but are there like Mike Love sings the lead on this one?
No, I think he was one of the harmony guys. While Brian was writing, I don't know. I don't know.
I feel like he's the face of Kokomo era Beach Boys.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like now we're gonna guest on Full House.
Once Brian was out, Mike became the main dude, the lead dude. And I think Mike was the guy who was arguing against doing things like Pet Sounds because it was too weird and they should just stick to writing like basic surfing songs because they were commercially successful. And
I love Pet Sounds. I love blah, 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 blah. But there is nothing that sounds like the most horrifying thing in the world in mid-pandemic would be seeing some awful baby boomer 80-year-old being like, I get around, get around, I get around. Like, with a bunch of like white shorted baby boomers like clapping along without masks. You're the worst generation.
There was a famous show in Iowa of the Beach Boys. I think it must have been in the Quad Cities or in like Clinton or something on the Mississippi River where the mayflies are thick and or used to be at least. And they get out on stage and the lights come on them and they're all wearing white. So they're like, it's just like glowing and they just instantly were just bombarded with mayflies and they got through about 30 seconds of one song and had to cancel the show because they couldn't play with like just completely covered in mayflies. And obviously I guess didn't have different costumes to wear. So
I feel like that band in a lot of ways is a perfect summary of some of the worst of that generation outside of Brian Wilson's genius. Like a band of those people like the Beach Boys who sing songs about surfing and none of them surf.
Right.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of other Beach Boys songs. I just know nothing about Mike Love. I remember being a kid and seeing an episode of Full House where Jesse tries to sneak them his demo tape.
Yeah, and Mike Love was probably even a dick on Full House.
Just I think he was eating a bucket of chicken or something.
The first concert I ever went to was Beach Boys with Mike Love, which I was very excited about because as a child, like I feel like going to like Chuck E. Cheese or whatever, I would play like the surfing game and they would like play like Beach Boys songs and that made me be like, I'm into surf music as a 7 or 8-year-old, you know? And I was I had a great time at the concert, you know? I didn't know that Mike Love was an asshole.
I think more and more, man, I think that everybody's an asshole.
I mean, yeah.
Speaking of nonsense, but speaking of like cultural baby boomer movements, did you know your favorite? It is the 25th anniversary of the death of Jerry Garcia today.
I saw that. I heard it on the radio is what happened. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I was 13 when that happened. That was like, I was just getting into like really into the Grateful Dead.
Mm-hmm.
That was he's a big influence on me, like as a songwriter. I think that they're like the most polarizing band ever, right. One of the most polarizing bands ever. And I could go on and on about why I love them. And I think that we'll start a controversial topic here, but like I really do think two of the most like important American bands ever, just culturally, are the Grateful Dead and Nirvana, because there's so much. But the Dead, being young and getting into Jerry Garcia, just got me into all this different music. I mean, that's how I found out. You know, my grandparents listened to Merle Haggard. I didn't think Merle Haggard was cool when I was a kid. Then I heard the Dead play Merle Haggard, and I got into Merle. There's a lot of music like that. They got me into experimental music and country music and folk and jazz. And I just think he's a really underrated songwriter. So, like, I don't love all of the culture that goes with the Grateful Dead, but there are these, especially Jerry Garcia songs, that I think are like some of the greatest songs ever written. Loser, War Fret. There's a ton of them. I know we've tortured you on the road a lot with.
Yeah, I'm certainly not like a Deadhead. I used to be pretty much anti Grateful Dead, based solely really on like the culture around it, and the people I had interacted with wearing Grateful Dead t-shirts. And it was kind of like when I was in high school, I was into like stupid like pop punk and like the post rock movement in Chicago, and it seemed like the antithesis of that. So it was just kind of like, all right, like, but through you guys, I've definitely come to have an appreciation for the music, and I'm always interested to hear what you and John Lindenbaum, who I say you guys, they're the two who like to, I stir the pot by saying stuff like, play me a Grateful Dead song I won't hate, and then they argue about not only which song but which version.
And then we play like 20.
Exactly. We should do, the three of us, a podcast like Analyze Fish, with the great Harris Whittles and Scott Aukerman, is that his name?
Oh yeah.
That's where, if you guys don't know that podcast, you should check it out, where Harris Whittles is a huge fish head and Scott Aukerman hates them. And it's just a show of him trying to convince him that fish is good, and he's very bad at convincing him that fish is good.
The thing about the Dead is that, like, I grew up pretty obsessed with it and was way into everything, and it did, like, a lot of it stuck, but a lot of it, you know, like, I think 90s Grateful Dead and some 80s Grateful Dead is just unlistenable, which some people get really frustrated with. But the really early psychedelic stuff into the 70s, I'm obsessed with. But it is funny to see how many people have, like, there's a musical culture around the Dead where there are people who clearly, like, appreciate the Dead, love the songwriting, like, love, I don't know, working man's Dead, and it's influenced their music. And then there is this whole world of people that are like, I only listened to the Grateful Dead and I wanted to play and sound exactly like them. And I always think that world is a little funny. I have a really good friend. Packy played on your record, and he's amazing. Like, he can play exactly the Jerry stuff and is unreal. And I'm always blown away when I see him do it. And I always think that, like, I was never kind of pushed to play like that, but I liked the way that he structured songs.
Right.
And did that. But I think there's a lot of, like, there's all this, you know, there's a whole world of, like, Grateful Dead tribute bands and, like, people who follow around Grateful Dead tribute bands. Dan Ingenthron, our good friend, played in one. But I have another buddy who would tell this story. He's an amazing, like, blues guitar player, and he loves the Dead, but he plays, you know, like really straight up blues guitar. He rips it. And he was telling a story about sitting in with a Dead band and people got mad at him because he didn't play like Jerry. And I'm like, that's a little bit intense. Like, I only want to hear this. I only want to hear it this way. I only want to, but yeah, I am kind of glad that that band is getting attention kind of outside of just, like, the weirdo hippie jam band world now. And it seems that, like, a lot of Americana artists, a lot of, like, great indie bands kind of cite them as an influence. And, you know, there was a really awesome tribute record that came out the other year that, like, the War on Drugs played on and the National played on. And, you know, Hiss Golden Messenger is a huge Deadhead and talks about them all the time. So I really like that like the Dead that I like, you know, that, like, late 60s, early 70s Dead. There's a lot of people who are influenced by that making records right now and citing the band as a huge influence.
And that is, like, even like, I think, to your point, it's even softened for me the guard that it was put up about the Grateful Dead in my youth, and made me a bit more curious and a bit more listening.
But being a Dead fan is kind of like being a Cub fan, where a lot of times you're like, I think these people are actively trying to lose me. Like, I think they're actively making moves to be like, oh, you thought you liked us? Here's John Mayer.
Right. Oh, our guest last week, Chris Wiersma, and I, and our second guest, Andre, were talking not too long ago, and we made an argument about John Mayer in the Grateful Dead, which is, I think, for most, I think that's a very controversial topic, right? Like Dead fans are kind of split on it. Some people like love his energy that he brings to it, and his dedication to the sound or whatever. But we agreed that the Dead are actually just taking one for the team, and in a perfect world, it's better that John Mayer is playing Dead songs than John Mayer playing John Mayer songs. And so it's like
totally.
It's a net positive for the world.
But that kind of speaks to what I'm talking about, which I'm like, I am genuinely blown away. Like, it's cool, Jerry's, to get like technical. He played a lot like Mixolydian, and he played very modally, and it's very cool. But I am always fascinated by this like guitar culture that's come up around him, where like people who want to play Garcia stuff, they get guitars that sound like that, and they play very close to what he was doing, and they kind of, I don't want to say it's imitation, but it's, because some people are just incredible at it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the funny thing about the John Mayer situation is like, okay, let's take this guy who is this world famous, world renowned guitar player who all these people love, and let's get him to play like the guy who used to be in our band. Like,
true.
It's kind of weird. And I think that before he was in the band, they had the real life version of that. Remember that Mark Wahlberg movie, Rockstar? Yeah. Where he's, he's in a tribute band for what's the name of the band?
It's like Dragon.
Something like Steel Dragon or something.
Yeah.
That movie's great. But they go and like the tribute guy then becomes him. That happened with the Dead. They hired, like, there was this Dead tribute band, the Dark Star Orchestra. And at one point when the Dead got back, they're like, okay, we'll get the Jerry Garcia from this band.
Yeah.
It's very funny how many like Jerry Garcias are out there.
Sure.
It's like, oh, what style of guitar do you play? Like Jerry Garcia style of guitar, which speaks to Jerry Garcia, like, which speaks to that guy's, genius.
Totally.
But we can stop talking about the Dead. I know that you
was that it's just something I don't know that much about. So I'm learning here.
I'm sure I'm driving people insane. I'm sure there's some Deadhead watching right now, like, he's screwing everything up.
Was that your music news that you wanted to talk about?
That might be the only music. I don't know what other music news there was, man. I'll click on stories and be like, oh, I'll read it. There was one, I was going to text it to you this morning. I read this article in the Chicago Tribune, and the headline was like, artists are leaving Chicago for other places. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And I read this article, and it really only referenced two people. And one person saying they were going to move to Germany, and the other saying they got a gig in Mexico. And I'm like, man, this is not a trend. This is two people saying they're leaving the city for these gigs. I don't know how you go do those gigs right now.
Right. Probably get there, quarantine 2 weeks, and then you're free.
But it's funny because it just seems like music news, the stuff that we've been talking about the past few weeks, it's just kind of every week is a little bit more of the same. Like, I don't know. We're still waiting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We kind of talked last week about the streaming platforms and how that's kind of here to stay. And Chris, Andre, and I, and some other amazing programmers and people are part of the team that puts together Mission Creek Festival. And before this today, I had a socially distanced outdoor meeting with Andre and Chris to talk about how Mission Creek can be online. Because we're just like assuming, if it's possible, we're assuming that come next April it won't be possible to do shows. So, which is sad, but it's also fun to just kind of like spitball and come up with ideas on how it can work and ways to be different and intentional and more curatorial and less reliant on touring and routing and all of that in putting together a festival. So it's kind of cool.
I mean, I think in general, we talked a little bit about this last week, but I've been thinking about it a lot just kind of outside touring and stuff. And the curatorial aspect of music is kind of the big thing that I want to hunt for. I think there's such a need for that's outside of traditional album criticism.
Totally.
And I even think about that with stuff that we've said where it's like, man, I have fun shitting on some records, but I would rather talk about things that I'm into than things that I'm not into. And, well, I mean, on this platform, not to you directly. To you, I'd like to bitch about everything.
Which is how our friendship grew.
But
our first tour together was 7 hours a day of just bitching about everything.
You know who sucks? But I do think I was thinking about that with this Spotify thing too, where it's is the issue that there's not enough content, or is the issue that there's not a good way to break through all the content? And I was even looking at Spotify because they have that like Discover Weekly thing and all of this stuff about some releases. But if you go on your Spotify app and you go to releases that came out, to their release section, that's never catered to you.
No,
it's always these like records that I'm like, why? I'm not listening to any of this stuff.
Well,
and
do you ever listen to their daily mixes that they make for you? Yeah. And so like I'll listen to it and be like, half of this is exactly what you and I bitch about and hate. Like you have no idea what I like.
Your algorithm doesn't get my soul, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. Like when you talk about, streaming and the streaming platforms, and especially with festivals, I mean, when you're not dealing with like routing bands, when you're not dealing with who's on the road and all the insane scheduling issues, it does present a pretty great opportunity to like really try to turn people on to stuff.
Right.
And
what else are you going to do? You're sitting at home. You might as well tune in and watch for a song, half of a song, and decide if you want to hear more, And that's kind of like, I mean, I feel like you were saying with the Dead, there aren't a lot of like, maybe I'm wrong about this, bands that are like gateways to other music that I've noticed lately, where like the Dead turned you on to Merle Haggard, and maybe I'm wrong about all this, but like I don't see a whole lot of like those kind of like cultural cornerstone bands who are able to expand people's musical taste, right? Whereas, I don't know, if you get into the latest, Americana record, like if you are just finding Americana through the Jason Isbell record, not to bring that up again, I feel like it's mostly pointing you to other Jason Isbell records, and then maybe the Drive-By Truckers if you went deep. But it's not like, it doesn't feel like this thing where there's tentacles to it and it's drawing from all these places and you can go down the rabbit holes.
Yeah, I mean, a band that I thought always did that well, and this probably speaks to my age, but I always thought that Wilco did that really well.
Yeah.
That there were always, they always kind of they were doing their thing in a very original way, and Wilco sounded like Wilco, but you could listen to a Wilco record and they'd be like, we got really into the band Television for this one, and we were really talking about that stuff, and you can kind of dig your way through. I always thought they were good at it. I think there are some other bands, but you're right. Like that reference alone is, I'm talking about stuff that happened 20 years ago.
Right.
And I try to think about bands now. And again, I don't think that those bands don't exist.
Right.
I just think that we've gotten to a point that it's so hard for us to find these bands that are able to sustain enough to actually like make it. Like, what's the last, and I'm talking about like rock band, that's had like that kind of cultural impact. I think that there are a lot of people in like the experimental world, or even in the pop world, in the jazz world, that have time to breathe and have time to move through a lot. I'm
that
trying to
have
figure
like
out how to say this right.
sustainable like staying power, you know, that are like multiple albums of influence and staying on top. Yeah, I don't know. Like, because what comes to mind is like the Foo Fighters, like have been around and are still making records that people seem to dig, or like Kings of Leon, or I guess Jack White would be a certain kind of person like that. Well, I know not everybody loves Jack White, but
Jack White's a good example though.
Yeah.
Of that, but again, that's like an old reference now.
Yeah, or the Black Keys, I guess, is one where I think there are tentacles to it, and that they are so involved with other music that you kind of go down these different rabbit holes.
But see, I like the Jack White reference because he actively, like, will through his label put out records of like these old blues records from, you know, the last century that he's like, okay, boom. But now, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because how bands talk about that stuff has changed. I think one of the things that was so cool about the Dead is that the way that they referenced their influences was always original, but it was whether they would, cover a song or reinterpret a song, or even the side projects that they did, like Garcia had bluegrass bands and, but they were such a huge band and such a huge moment. And it's hard to think of, who gets there anymore. I think we talked about that too. Like, it's really bizarre to think of what bands have that kind of draw anymore. What new bands have that kind of draw?
I don't know. The Chainsmokers.
The Chainsmokers. And I think when we talk a lot about the Americana world, because that's kind of what we're in, I think one of the things that can get lost in Americana is such a broad term that the influences are kind of Americana itself.
Right.
So it's like this generic thing where, somebody could have very specific influences or reference points where it's like, oh, they started playing because they loved, Gillian Welch, and they got into Gillian Welch because of Oh Brother Where Art Thou, and then Oh Brother Where Art Thou got them into all this old folk music and stuff, and they can have those references.
You're muted there, Ry. Let me see.
Am I back?
You're back now. Okay, there you go. Lost you for a second.
But I think sometimes the specific influences get lost because a lot of the stuff ends up kind of sounding the same.
Right.
Like Townes Van Zandt, you could be really influenced by Townes Van Zandt and John Prine and, some of these writers. And I don't think that's going to necessarily always translate in your music the way. Like, do you know what I'm saying? I'm bad.
No, totally. I mean, I think that we've talked about this too. I think that the term Americana and the idea of Americana being a genre, as ill-defined as it is right now, is actually hurting what it was supposed to help. I think it was supposed to be like, oh, you like Gillian Welch, you might like the Drive-By Truckers, or you might like, I don't know, Nathaniel Rateliff. And because they all have like threads that go together, right? So like, and the whole thing is like, there's so many people making this music that is rooted in so many different kinds of American music. And like, even though they're mostly one, we can help each other out by making this bigger thing and having it not be, there's a classic, there's like an old school country style musician trying to make it on the country charts, because they're never going to do it. And they're more of an Americana, right? But I think that it's so wide and everything is so different that it's really hard to actually find the things you want to listen to in there. So if you are for the first time hearing Gillian Welch and you're like, oh, I want to hear more stuff like this. I want to go down this road. And you throw on the This Is Americana playlist on Spotify, and it kicks off with Drive-By Truckers and Nathaniel Rateliff, you're going to be like, this is nothing like what I just listened to.
Yeah.
Like what you really want to listen to is folk music or like old time music. And I think that like there is an advantage to actually tightening the genres, you know, and I think Americana is a sound. And I think the Drive-By Truckers are a great example of that. I think the band is Americana. And like that is a thing that is worth separating and saying, this is this sound, this is this kind of music. But when you have, you know, like Dom Flemons from the Carolina Chocolate Drops, who puts out a folk record, that's a folk record. You know, that's not, I think it should be separate, and it's great, and there's nothing wrong with it, but I think it should be separate. I think these people who are doing literal Merle Haggard impressions on their records, making classic country and trying to sound like that, there should be like a classic country genre, and it doesn't have to all get muddied the way it is. And we've talked about how there's no real critics in Americana or anywhere really anymore. But, you know, it all just gets lumped together, and it's just this big mushy mess that is like really hard to navigate.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Last year at the Big Ears Festival, there was a panel with like the International Anthem label. And the discussion was about like what the term progressive jazz means to them, because the label had kind of coined the term, and then they had a bunch of their artists on the panel, and it was like Micaiah McCraven was on it, Jeff Parker was on it, Jamie Branch was on it, and it was really interesting because like that, you know, people hear the word jazz and think all kinds of, you know, that encapsulates so much music that is
Totally,
you know, it's, some people think of, you know, sitting like Nordstrom's trio piano jazz, like restaurant jazz.
Yeah.
And then some people think of crazy free jazz and but they all get thrown in the same general category. And then there are all these offshoots. But I think musicians always struggle with that like nobody wants to be in like pigeonholed. Nobody wants to be, everybody wants to like get away from being categorized and kind of wants to buck against the category they're thrown in, but also wants a way to be like, yeah, but I want to be able to describe my music, but I don't want it to be with all of this stuff. And you and I have talked about it a lot. Like I would struggle a lot with getting thrown in, and though I can totally accept it, like I would struggle with my records being called Americana, not because I have any problem with Americana, but because of what you're talking about. Like I don't write classic country. I don't write this other stuff. I felt like I had more in common with Songs Ohio than I did with, you know, whatever.
Right.
That's on me. But where was I going with this? I think you're right in that people don't like categorization, but they want more. It would be helpful to have something more finite, like under the umbrella of Americana. Can we have some pockets, like you were saying, that tie in classic country to classic country, or acoustic music, right? Or, you know, Bob Dylan is Bob Dylan, but you could be, who I keep referencing on these shows, but you could be really influenced by the first few Bob Dylan records and just be playing acoustic guitar with a harmonica. Or you could be like, no, I'm Blonde on Blonde is my favorite, and I'm in this like electric band with an organ. They're not the same thing, right, even though it's the same artist.
Right.
And I think that puts, here's where I was going. I think what happens is that then some people get a little bit afraid to grow and to go outside of the box. And I think an example of that is, you know, Sturgill Simpson's career arc, in that he put out his first two records that kind of blew him up. And then his third was a little bit weird. It had horns and stuff, and it was really polarizing. And then the one after that was like synthesizers and drum machines and stuff. And I think people hated it, right? Like it got
Some people, I mean, certainly the fans, a lot of the fans of his first two records hated it.
And the interesting thing to me hearing that is those songs still sounded like Sturgill Simpson songs. They just were produced differently.
Right.
And I think sometimes we get in these places where we're afraid to let artists kind of grow. Chris Wiersma last week was talking about the 70s. And, you know, you're having these people put out all these records and you're forcing them to put out more records than they can handle. And a lot of them are crap. The counter argument to that, though, is like how you let Tom Waits go from Closing Time to Swordfish Trombones and Rain Dogs.
Right.
It's all that stuff in the middle, and it's allowing somebody to develop and grow and take risks and do stuff. And I sometimes worry that we get away from that because people are afraid of veering too far away from what they do. And
right.
that might just be me. I might be totally wrong on that.
No, I think you're right. I think that when a record comes out, if you got really into somebody's first record, there is a tendency to want the second record to be exactly like the first record, just like maybe different words, you know? And every time it's not, people seem to like buck it, right? And they seem to be like, oh, I like, you should hear his old stuff, you know, that kind of thing. And I think that does get into people's heads. I mean, you have produced my last two albums, which I think too, a lot of people who like are not maybe heads of Americana would say they sound pretty similar, I think. But we made like very specific decisions to make them different and to have a different vibe and to not have so much of this and not have so much of that and make sure it stands out. Because I think that you think this, and I completely agree that like I think the worst thing you can do is put out a record that sounds exactly like your last record. But then again, I mean, some people are very good at it.
Some people
like
are great.
Gillian Welch.
So if I think about your records, I think that the first one was this definite, like, you wanted to record at Luke's studio. There's a big part to be like, we want to use Dave Zolo, this like, you know, this band. And, you know, there's a lot that comes with that, this like raucous sound. And the batch of songs that you had shaped that first record. And I love that first record. I kind of think records like your songs, records will kind of dictate themselves. But you did that first record, and then you had this like long period of writing, trying stuff out, toying around. I mean, there was a period where your second record was almost going to be like a lamb chop record with synthesizers.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And then when you kind of, you know, went through a lot, you had this batch of songs, we started playing them, and the songs dictated how the record sounded.
Right.
And I think that the cohesive thread in there is like a lot of the players are the same. You're you. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I like is I think you got better.
Well, thank you.
And that's what I hear. Like, and that's what I want to hear on everybody's record. I want to hear them get better at something and allow themselves to kind of like, you know, let that dictate stuff. Because I think it is a hard decision. And I'm not saying that your second record is quiet, but I think it is. I think it's noticeably, you know, there's some bangers on there.
It's subdued though.
But it's a subdued thing because that's what you were doing. And I think that's a big choice to be able to say like, look, this is where the songs went and we should follow that. You know, we should follow where the songs took us and allow that to happen, you know, and not sit back and say like, oh, is this too subdued though? Because that last record, you know, was a shit kicking rock and roll record. Is that what people are going to expect?
Right.
The second you start thinking that way, I think you've already lost.
Yeah, I think an important part of the process for me was And like unfortunately it's for the way we did it, it cost money to like do it. But like I went in and I was like, okay, we're gonna follow up that record, and I want to do like still like bigger rock and roll songs, but I want synths, and I want to do it like you said, like we were talking about Lamb Chop and stuff, and like it was fun. Yeah, I don't think it worked out. There's a reason those songs didn't end up on a record, and it's not that the songs were bad, and it's not that even they came out wrong. It was just like it wasn't right, and like it took I think 3 or 4 recording sessions, and I think we had 9 songs on this record. I think there were a total of 17 that we recorded just to get to those 9 songs. You know,
Yeah.
And I think that they're like another problem in. Like we were talking about last week with the Spotify guy saying you need to produce more, is like I don't think I would have felt right putting out the stuff that we recorded in between the last 2 records. And I don't think it would have been great. And you know, whatever, you put out some bad music, like I'm obviously not like big enough that it's going to like plummet my career or something like that, but like you want to be proud of everything that you put out. And if you're trying to force out records, you're going to end up putting out things you're not necessarily proud of.
But you hit on an important thing, which is I think that it was really important that we did try that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, and that's kind of what I mean in that, you know, are people able to do that anymore? You know, to utilize studios in that way, or utilize the process in a way that says, you know, I'm going to create a lot and I'm not going to use a lot of it, because this middle chunk is what got me to the good stuff. Right. I don't know if you would have written Hoist Your Silver if you hadn't have done, you know, that other batch. Right. Got you there. I don't think some of the production decisions we would have made if we hadn't tried something else out first.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so many musicians who have these vaults of stuff, you know, all these Neil Young records that he never put out, or all of this stuff that doesn't come out, because that's part of the creative process. And the idea now that you should just create content and put out as much as you can, like, no, I absolutely not. I want to have, I tell this to songwriting students too, where, you know, you can't just write 10 songs and then call it an album.
No.
You have to have snippets. You have to have little pieces. And sometimes you might write a song that you never use, and then 3 years later realize that's where this chorus should go.
Right.
That chorus I wrote 3 years ago is for this song.
Right.
But yeah,
it's hard to be patient, but yeah, you got to. It's
really hard to be patient. And I think that we should, you know, I think that doesn't just come from the artist. It's hard to be patient as an artist, but I think that listeners need to be more patient. And I think that one of the things that the whole idea of content and streaming and access at all times has taken away from us is patience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's the new record came out this week. The Jason Molina, I mean, the song's Ohio Guy, like I think he recorded it in 2008 and in the UK, and it's this really depressing record. It never came out. They just released it. And if you've listened to his stuff, like, some of it's hard to listen to. Like, you have to work at it. It's really sad. It's depressing, but it pays off. But you have to be patient with it. And I wonder what we lose in sacrificing that as fans.
Right.
In being able to just scroll through and content's content and just give me a bunch of records instead of like, how about I give you one record and you take your time with it?
Right. Listen to it twice.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, listen to the whole thing.
And not listen to the first 30 seconds and skip.
Yeah.
Which, if I would have done that, I mean, almost all of my favorite records took several listens to really make me realize they are my favorite records. Right?
Totally.
Yeah. Well, while we're talking about records, should we do a Crumbs music review? We haven't done one in a while.
Let's
do you
do
have
it.
something to review?
Sure.
All right, go.
Hey man, what have you been listening to?
Music review. Music review.
What have you been listening to, Ryan?
Well, the one that I was just talking about is that Jason Molina release. I
Right.
haven't gotten through the whole thing yet. It came out Friday, and if you don't know Jason Molina, he was the songs Ohio and Magnolia Electric Company, and just a brilliant songwriter. He passed away in 2013. And this is, I think, the first release of stuff, like, new release of stuff. And then I guess this kind of speaks to what we're talking about, like here's a record that the guy did in 2008, recorded it in the UK, and just like never put it out.
Right.
And you kind of wonder what his thought process was there. I mean, it is sad. He was clearly in a dark place when he wrote it. It's a sad record, but I love his stuff. And I guess in the same vein, PJ Harvey just put out the demos from Dry, and some of that stuff I like even better than the record Dry.
Right.
So those are the two things that I've been really kind of have been on rotation here.
How do you feel about that? I mean, like, obviously you're a Molina fan, so, and I am too. So like anything that comes out, you're going to want to hear it and you're going to give it a fair shake. But I feel weird about releasing music that the artist never wanted to release in the first place.
Totally.
After they died.
Well,
it's like the Lost Challenger novels, right? Like,
totally.
He didn't want them to come out, so we're not going to put them out.
It kind of ties into what we were talking about. Like, it feels more like an exercise. Like, I'm a fan of his, and I'm a fan of songwriting and making records and everything. But I definitely can see, I listen to it, loving it, but also I totally understand why it wouldn't come out.
Right.
I mean, it is sad. It's a hard listen. But I kind of appreciate that stuff. I appreciate it when things that weren't released come out later, just as an exercise and to give, I always like to have more. One thing that I'm not crazy about are all these like mega releases that come out now, which is like, do you want to hear every single take from the studio of like, so-and-so's worst album? Like that stuff,
it's horrible.
I don't need.
I would be mortified in my grave if they were like, here's the first 5, or here's the other 5 takes of this song that Brian recorded. Like, and I thought about that when they released a couple years ago. They released that Johnny Cash album that he recorded in the 80s. That was sandwiched by 2 bad Johnny Cash albums.
Yes.
And it was horrible. It was just like not good. And to hear people like on the radio, like on Sirius XM, on like Outlaw Country or Willie's Roadhouse, just trying to muster up the like great new music from Johnny Cash. Here's maybe we won't play a single. That stuff bums me out. But there's so many that are like so good. Like From a Basement on the Hill, the Elliott Smith record is incredible. I love it. And then later they came out with New Moon, which was more stuff that he had recorded, which I thought was pretty good. I don't know. Yeah, it's a weird thing. I mean, like, I just think of like myself, if I am deciding not to put something out, I don't want it out. And
yeah, man. I mean, it's funny to tie it back into this 25th anniversary of the passing of Jerry Garcia. There are so many like Grateful Dead releases of shows or things that will get played on their like Sirius channel where it's like, why are you playing this? This is terrible. Like, they're clearly whacked out of their minds. They can't sing. This is a horrible version. Like, you shouldn't just put this out because it exists and you can.
Right.
Like, I want to have some kind of quality control.
For sure.
I'm trying to think of like the takes that we did on your record, or there's takes on my record where it's like we were recording but learning the song. Like, it's never intended to be a take.
Right. Yeah. But like, yeah, Luke records everything, which has bit me in the ass multiple times. Where like now after every take, he plays me like going like, ugh. You're like with a voice crack, you know. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that artists should decide what comes out, right? And sometimes you see like record labels putting out albums that artists don't want to come out and stuff like that. It bothers me. But my review this week, I sent you this record, is this Dougie Pool record that came out June 12th. I just found out about it this week. My buddy Alex Fair sent it to me, and it's awesome. The album's called Freelancers Blues. It's like funny and it's dark. It's kind of like a Dave Berman cosmic country record, and I highly recommend it.
I would say that's a good record to talk about in our conversation too, because I listening to that, I'm like, man, these are like country songs in form and execution, but the production on that record feels fresh.
Yeah.
And new and different, but not forced.
Yeah.
Like not forced. Like it doesn't feel like I'm listening to something that's like, you know, totally out of left field.
Yeah. And there's like total like just like typical country stuff on there, like melodies, and one of the guitar parts is like exactly Jolene. But it's different. It's cool. I mean, it's just like, and that's the first thing I thought when I listened to it. I was like, this is cool. Like, it sounds good. He's got like kind of a goofy, different voice, and his writing is pretty funny. And with such hits as Vaping on the Job and Buddhist for a couple days. To Not Have a Brain is one of my favorites. These Drugs Aren't Working. It's a great record. People should check it out. And I'm thankful to Alex Fair for recommending it to me. I hadn't talked to Alex in 6 months, and he just texted me like, hey, man, you might like this record. And I was like, whoa, I do like this record. We should do more of that with our friends. Send good music to your friends. We appreciate it.
Yes. Can we review one more thing that's music related, but not an album?
Yeah.
Did you watch the David Foster documentary on Netflix?
I did.
Holy God.
David Foster is the Darth Vader of music.
He really, in so many ways, man.
First of all, yeah, we were texting about this. You mentioned he's responsible for so much bad music in the world.
He is responsible for like every song that my mom liked when I was young that made me go in the room and like crank Jerry Garcia or like buy 9 Inch Nails singles. I didn't know the same guy was responsible for everything.
I didn't either.
So if
I had heard his name, I had no idea who he was.
David Foster is a nightmare human being who has been a record producer since the 70s, when he like started working on a Barbra Streisand record or something awful, and then is responsible for he's the guy that did Peter Cetera era Chicago records. Yeah. He's the guy that's responsible for like Celine Dion and Whitney Houston and Michael Bublé and
Josh Groban.
But this guy is the most, like, if you were gonna make a caricature of like an evil music business person, it would be this guy.
And if you were gonna write a bad movie about someone coming up in the music business who had no trouble whatsoever, it would be either Garth Brooks or this one, because he's just like, yeah, I don't know, I was like a genius, and so I went to school, and then I was like a genius there, and then I went to England, and it's like, oh look, there's Elton John.
Did you catch the part at the? Okay, well, just there's so much to talk about here. There's so much to unpack. Right. One, if you're a fan of music documentaries like Brian and I are, It means you can watch a music documentary about any band.
Right.
And what's very clear are the more you can like distance yourself from the band's music, the better the movie is, because it's like, holy shit, these people are insane. And it's not a letdown.
Right.
Because you watch other music documentaries about your heroes and you're like, oh, they kind of are jerks.
Yeah.
This one, so like Garth, in the Garth documentary, which I thought was the craziest music documentary I'd ever seen until this one, his whole like attempt to characterize himself and have other people clearly on script was about his like sincerity.
Right.
Like, let's just talk about how I'm a guy. Like, I'm a good guy. I love my parents and I just want to work hard. The David Foster one was about how he's an asshole.
Right. And he's like,
but that he like has to be.
Is him being like, you think that this movie's going to come out how you want it to, but it's going to come out exactly how I want it to. And it's like, and then at the end, the last scene, he's like, am I an asshole? Yeah, I'm an asshole. Like, I've been an asshole. And it's like, oh, so that's what you wanted.
He tells a story early in the movie about like, yeah, I had 4 sisters. My mom made them toast for breakfast. I got bacon and eggs. What? Yeah. Why are you telling this story? Is that true?
Haley, my wife, immediately after was like, this is what you get when you treat men superior and give them bacon and eggs. You get an asshole like this.
Yeah, totally. And then it just kept going in these amazing ways. Like he's talking to Barbara Streisand, and she's crazy too. And she's like, I know David's a genius because he always tells me he's a genius. And they start talking about this. He is. And then they start playing this awful song that's all like spacey synthesizers, and like it sounds like the soundtrack. You know those like videos of those psychedelic videos of outer space and like cats go floating by? That's what that song reminded me of. And they talk about it, and he's like, so Barbara comes to me, says, I want this to sound like it's coming from somewhere else. No drums, no bass, all synthesizers. And so they talk about this for 5 minutes. At the end, it cuts to him, and he just like looks up and goes, I nailed it.
He was just that about everything. He's just like, Quincy Jones told me, come over and help us write a song. So I just sat down at the piano. I made something up. He loved it. That's like every story. And then he's the one part, one of my favorite little moments was when they're like clearly they're like, well, you worked on this song with Tony Braxton and like all this. And he's like, oh yeah, I was hanging out with Tony Braxton last night. We were just talking about this. Like, what?
There's a scene in the movie where he's like, and he's making a documentary about himself.
Yeah, he's clearly driving the boat here. And they're setting up for a show, and he like his phone rings, and he looks at the camera, and he's like, come here. Hold his camera up to the phone, and it says Stevie Wonder. He's like, I guess I should answer this one. And I'm like, you made Hey Stevie. And nobody talks on the other end.
Like, you're making a documentary about your career.
Right.
You worked with Stevie Wonder. I think we're all going to find out that you know him.
Right. We don't need to know that he calls you. It's fine. Yeah.
And then it's like all of the songs that I'm like, oh, it makes so much sense that these are all written by the same guy.
Right. And they all sound the same.
They're all bad. They all sold.
But the 3 most craziest parts of the documentary have nothing to do with music.
Nothing to do with music at all.
Number 1, he hits a dude with his car at 2 a.m. coming home from the studio. Just rails him. The dude's laying in the fetal position, barely alive. Turns out it's like a Tony Award-winning actor from Broadway. And so he's going, I killed this guy, whatever. The guy's still alive. You come to find out that the guy had like a hematoma in his brain, and that's why he was acting crazy and in the middle of the road at 2 a.m. And if he hadn't hit him with the car, they would have never found the hematoma, and the guy would have died later that day. But because he hit him with his car, they figured it out.
And then when he's telling the story about hitting him with his car, it doesn't sound like an accident. Like, it
No.
doesn't sound like all of a sudden there was a guy that jumped out. He's like, I'm driving down the road, and then I see this guy acting crazy, and then I hit him with my car. And it's
Well, he's like, I see him. The first second, you're going, what is that? A person? The second second, you're going, oh my God, that's a person. What are they doing in the road? And the third second is when you think to swerve, but I didn't.
yeah, and there's no break. Like, the first second, if I went, what's that coming to me in the road? I would also start maybe like hitting the brake.
And maybe trying to get around. Yeah. I don't know.
But yeah,
And then he's like, and the way he's like, turns out saved his life. Like this whole like, oh my God. And he talks about the guy called him 5 weeks later, and he goes, the guy goes,
I lost you.
hey, you there?
I'm here.
Oh God.
I lost
We
you
lost it for a second. We're back. Oh no. Anyway, that's probably a sign that we should move on. But I want to mention the two other things. Number two, the guy doesn't get on elevators. It's not explained why. He
Not
just
explained
can't do
why.
it.
It's
And
in the
there's a
movie.
scene where they try to get him to go on one, and he gets on, and he's like, "I can't do it." And he gets off. And number three was when he goes, he was a bad parent, a very bad parent. He knows he was a bad parent, and he had a quote that was like, "Look, I did my best. I could have done better, but I'm doing my best now." And they need to pull up their bootstraps and get over it. Cool.
Can I
And then
add
his
one
daughters are
more?
like, we want our dad to be happy. It's like, why? Why do you want? And now he's married to a 32-year-old who's younger than all of his daughters. It's wild.
Can I add one to that?
Yeah.
He also gets to the point where he talks about the charity that he started. Um,
Oh, yeah.
that I didn't fully understand what they do, but it's, you know, like kids are getting, it's families from transplant, whatever. It doesn't matter. He starts talking about his charity, and then there are clips of the charity's award ceremony, and he's named his like this charity that he started to help kids getting transplants. He just used his name. It's the David Foster Foundation.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, why didn't you name it after that first girl? Like, I don't know. The guy's
Yeah.
ego is kind of amazing. And the whole documentary is framed at the beginning like he wants to get an EGOT. And
He
so
needs a
he's,
Tony.
yeah, and so he wants a Tony. And so the beginning of it is kind of like he's working on a musical. So the whole time I'm watching it, I'm like, wow, we're going to get to the end and find what piece of shit musical this Joker wrote. It ends, he has not written a musical.
He's writing
working on
5.
it. He's writing 5, and he's just kind of like, it's just going to happen. I'm going to write a hit musical.
The whole time I kept waiting for that and being like, oh, what Tony did he write that won a musical? Like,
Right.
just like, or what musical did he write that won a Tony? Yeah, I just, it's bonkers. And I can't say that it's a good documentary. 'Cause
No,
there
it's
are many
terrible.
times that are very boring. But if you are just a music doc head like we are, you should just watch it.
If you like watching crazy people, like it really was.
Yeah, if you want to be like, I'm glad I'm not that guy. I mean, yeah, I'm glad I'm not that guy. I was gonna say that the money might be nice, but not at that cost. And if you want to know why everything your mom listened to in the 90s sucked, that's
It's
one to
all
watch.
this guy. It's all this guy.
Every cheesy synthesizer, over reverbed diva sound. That's him, man. Well, I was wondering if the two of us would get to the point where we have made an episode as long as our usual ones, but we definitely have. So welcome to this, I was going to say special episode of Crumbs, but it's really a non-special. We don't have a special guest. So this is as not special as it gets, guys. Thanks for hanging with us.
Thanks for hanging.
We're going to do more of this because this was fun.
Yes, sir.
We're not going to be around next week. I'm going to be out of town going camping again, just to get away from the world. So we'll see you in 2 weeks, and that'll be fun. Thanks, guys.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I